Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out on this rainy day to our monthly brown bag lunch event. I'd like to take this time to thank Dennis Anderson for sponsoring all our brown bag lunch events and making this program possible for our museum. So today's speaker I'd like to introduce is Anna Eckhoff. Anna is the author of the book A New Beginning, Life on the Frontlines, and she'll be sharing her story and her experiences as well as daring us to pursue our dreams. Afterwards, if anyone's interested, we do have a few copies of the book available for sale in the design store, and Anna would be available to sign any as well. So, all right, Anna, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alisa, for these nice words. And I'm so happy to see all of you here today. I think it's fantastic that you're taking time off to spend your lunch time here. And even coming from Des Moines, some of you, it's fantastic. Anyway, I have looked very much forward to come here today. Also because it's a place for Danish culture. And as you can hear on my accent, I'm Danish. So thank you very much for allowing me to come here today. I have written this book, as Lisa talked about, A New Beginning, Life on the Frontlines, to be able to tell people about how I was pursuing my dreams. And a book is a good format to tell about your experiences and your considerations. So that is basically why I wrote this book. I myself had a dream when I was young, having a large family, a big family, and also having an adventurous and exciting life. And these two things, they don't go very well together, I can promise you that. At first I had the big family, and I had 6 children. And when you have 6 children, you have a lot of work to do, and I also had a full-time job, and I just felt I was working all the time. And it's like you go around in, we call it a treadmill, so you do the same thing over and over again, and that's what I did. But then my husband, he died when I was 48 years old. And when I was 56, I thought now it's time to get this adventurous and exciting life before I'm getting too old and it would be too late. The real obstacle about leaving was, of course, the children. And at that time, I had 2 children living with me when I was 56. And when I started talking about me leaving the children, people were shaking their heads. And in Denmark, and I think it's the same in the States, it's always the women taking care of the children, and you can't leave your children before they finished with school. That's what I have learned in Denmark. So, but then I went to a workshop in Denmark with my work, and I don't think they should ever have sent me there, because at that workshop we were supposed to develop ourselves, and in one of the sessions we were supposed to talk about our dreams, and I was talking about my dreams. I was interviewed by one of the other participants, and I tell him that my dreams is to have this adventurous and exciting life. And then I say, almost in the same sentence, that this is not possible because I have a house and summer house and car and also these 2 children. But he convinced me within 5-10 minutes that it was possible to leave the children, it would be okay. He somehow gave me, I felt, the ethical permission to leave. When the session was finished, I went out of the door, out in the garden behind a red barn, and I was crying, and the teacher came out to me and asked me why I was crying, if something was wrong, and I said, no, I'm just so relieved that I've finally got this permission to leave the children. So So from that day, you can say my dream started, or I had to do the transition to my dream, but anyway, it started. So I would like, before I continue, to ask you if you ever had a dream you didn't have fulfilled. Yeah? And you? Yeah?
I did.
So some of you and the rest have no dreams. Yeah. Anyway. But if some of you have a dream also, I hope you can follow my story and get inspired to follow your dreams. As I said, I'm married and got these 6 children with my husband. And I started in Denmark, I never told this story what happened with my husband, but his leg was amputated when he was 40, and when he was 50, he died. That's the story about him. And when I was married, working in a large IT computer company in Denmark. And in this company, we made tax systems, IT tax systems for the government. So I'm an IT manager, or I also know all the technical parts. So that's my background. And when John died, I continued working for this company. Then, as I've told you, I had, now when I was 56, I started to do this new beginning, to have this dream fulfilled, and having an exciting and adventurous life. So I called my mother, because not everything was easy, I would say, to get this new life. I called my mother. My father was dead, but my mother was in her 80s and lived in Aarhus, if any of you know Aarhus. I think many of you have a Danish family, so you know Denmark very well. But my mother, I tell my mother that I plan to leave my 2 fatherless children home alone. And I also plan to go to the war zones to get this exciting and adventurous life. And my mother thought it was just awful what I was planning to do, because, and not because I was going to the war zones, but because I was leaving the 2 children home alone. And she tried to persuade me in the phone to stay back in Denmark, and I wouldn't listen to her because I already made up my mind to leave Denmark. And she wouldn't listen to me, so it ended that I hang up the phone because we could not talk together at all. And I don't think she ever accepted that I left the children. So that was one of the difficult ones. Because
how old were the children?
there were 15, the youngest, and 18, the oldest, and they went to high school. Yeah, the youngest just started high school. She'd been 1 year here in Washington D.C. going to high school. She was a bit young. Here they are, and I think this picture, I found it. I think that's from that time. And my youngest one, this is the one to the right, and the next youngest is Sarah. She's the one to the left, and the one in the middle is the neighbor's daughters. Because when I left them, I was told that the neighbor's daughter moved into the house, and she was out when I came home sometimes. But she moved, I think she had a good time in my house. Anyway, my 2 children, they were asked recently by the Danish national TV to talk about how it was that I left them alone in that age. And they were going to make a video about it, and you're going to see a very short clip from that video. But my youngest daughter, the one to the right, she said in that video that they were a bit young when I left them. She was 15. But they also were at that age where they didn't want their parents anymore, but they wanted to meet friends. and having a house on their own, and could be able to invite friends over to that house with no adults in the house. That was awesome. That's what they. Anyway, so I have heard afterwards that in Denmark, when you have high school parties, you warming up before the high school parties, drinking a bit, and all the house upwarming, before the high school parties, it was taking place in my house, in my town, and but it was only one time the police came. Yeah. So, but I also somehow became adults because they had to clean, they had to wash their clothes, and they had to cook, and they had to pay my bills. And normally in the beginning they put my bills in a bundle of papers over there, and they didn't pay my bills, and I got upset because then the company asked for money, and you had to pay in time, so they learned something about that. Anyway, now we have to see a picture of me, because I somehow also enjoyed a little bit to be separated from the children, because for many years I had this mother role, and now I suddenly had an adult role. I could speak with other adults, and this is from Iraq. I didn't have to cook, I didn't have to clean, and in Iraq I had to do my laundry, but many places where I worked I didn't have to do the laundry. So I felt I was free, could relax in the swimming pool after work. But I had to somehow find money to support the family at home, and I also had a house and a summer house and a car, so I had to have a job where I could make money. And the year we're talking about that I do this new beginning, it was in 2003. And in 2003, US, they had invaded Afghanistan in 2001, and they had invaded Iraq in 2003. So there were lots of jobs out there in the Middle East and Afghanistan with NGOs. You know all what NGOs are? If anybody don't know, yeah, I can explain. You don't know?
Yeah.
You know?
If you can explain, that'll be great.
And what it is? NGOs is non-government organizations. They don't basically make money. They somehow get money from donors, and then they pay vulnerable people in these war zones. Normally, that's how it works. So, but I couldn't, when I was going to apply for a job, I couldn't ask the NGOs what they could offer me. I had to find out what I could offer the NGOs, and it was definitely not making large administrative IT systems, tax systems in the war zones. So I had to find out what else I could do, and I had been studying at the business administration school in Copenhagen, and I learned about accounting and bookkeeping, so I thought I could become a finance assistant, a little bit be taught out there in the war zones how to do it. And so I started applying for jobs with the NGOs in the Copenhagen area. And it's very, very difficult. It's difficult because I was in my end of my 50s, and also because I really didn't have any experiences within finance. But finally, and I was pushing very hard, I was called for an interview with Danish Red Cross. And this interview was going to take place in English, and partly English. And I didn't know the English word for these accounting things. And so I took private lessons, and I learned about assets and liabilities and stuff like that. And then when I had the interview, the HR person said that I knew about the finance things, but I didn't know about the NGO world. So I took afterwards extra courses, and I learned about capacity building and logical framework and all these other words they have in the NGO world. And then I called her again and say, now I know the words. And I never were called for an interview again, but she thought I was ready to be sent out to other NGOs, and she recommended me with NGOs in the Copenhagen area. They all know each other. And I finally ended up in Danish Refugee Council, and Danish Refugee Council is, as far as I know, the biggest NGO in Denmark, and they had their biggest program at all in the whole world. They had that program down in the southern part of Russia because Putin, he has bombed Chechnya. So Chechnya looked like Gaza looks now, and there was around 1 million refugees, and Danish Refugee Council gave food to half of the people every single day. So it was a huge, huge program. So I became not finance assistant, I became head of administration, I became finance manager and personnel manager. And not only it was a management job, when the top person in the organization was out of Russia, I was responsible for this whole program. So it was somehow a very, very new beginning, but this is how I ended my new beginning and started my life in the Frontlines. I don't know about questions, how you do it normally. You take it on, or we just go ahead and you ask them.
It's pretty informal if anybody has questions throughout the talk, but otherwise you can do questions at the end too.
Yeah, whatever you do. And if we talk too much with questions, then we'll just make it shorter in the end. Anyway, I worked 15 years in the countries marked with green, and the countries marked with brown is other countries in the Middle East. And the reason why I highlight the Middle East is because more than half of the terror attacks in the world, it takes place in the Middle East. So many of the countries I work with have been among the most dangerous countries in the world. But I also have it a little bit, I don't know if you also have it, but I think you have it. And yet, Middle East is also something about adventure, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. So I worked 2 times in Sudan. Now I go away from the microphone. 2 times in Sudan, 3 times in Iraq, 3 times in Afghanistan. I've been partly in Lebanon and Kuwait. I've been in Israel OPT, and OPT that's occupied Palestinian territories. And then I've been to Libya and Tunisia. And I've been away for 15 years. And in most places I worked as administration manager with responsibility for finances and personnel, IT, logistics and procurement. And I worked for Danish NGOs in the beginning. I worked 1 year for UN, and then I worked for Norwegian Refugee Council several years, and in the end I worked for EU missions. Any of you know what EU missions?
European Union?
Yeah, European Union. And then they sent out people to these war zones, fragile states, because normally the government is totally collapsing when you have a bad situation. And then, for example, in Afghanistan, they sent policemen from Europe to Afghanistan to teach Afghan police how they should do it. So they're doing capacity building. Yeah. Today, I wanted to tell you about some stories from Afghanistan and some stories from OPT, because that's the hotspot at the moment. My first story is from Afghanistan, and as I said before, the US invaded Afghanistan in 2001, and they ousted Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan, and they ousted Taliban from the government. And then 5 million refugees came back from Iran and Pakistan. So somehow something good must has happened in Afghanistan since that happened. And I was 3 times in Afghanistan, and I would like to tell you a little bit about how I saw women develop from the first time I was there in 2007 till last time I was there in 2015. And I will also tell about the challenges they had. During Taliban, women were not allowed to go to school, they were not allowed to work, and they were not allowed to walk on the street without this burqa where the face is covered, and they were not allowed to walk without a male companion on the street. So Afghanistan is a very patriarchal, is that how you pronounce it, country. Then after the Americans came, women were allowed to work again, but when I first time was in Afghanistan, it was 2007 with Danish demining group. These women on the picture, I think they were the only women working there. They were cleaners. There was no women working in offices, and I think it was because they could not read and write, and they could not speak English. So only like service somehow they could work with.
So, could you speak Arabic or Iraqi or whatever they speak?
In Afghanistan, they speak some
Afghan.
Afghan language, Dari or something like that. I can't speak that. But when I worked in Tunisia, I had private lessons in Arabic. So, and I think I studied it 3 years Arabic, and I'm not an expert. I can read and write the letters, but if I try to put them together, I don't understand the word always. But I can lay on the beach and say, my name is Anna, and I'm from Denmark, and things like that. Yeah. Anyway, this is Norwegian Refugee Council, and they work with some of these 5 million refugees that came back to Afghanistan. And we had one woman in the office when I arrived, and this was her, Halima. And Halima, she could read and write, and she also had an education. And you can see she graduated from a university in Kabul when I was there. So it was somehow, it was fantastic. We had this one woman there. But every month, I'm in finance, and we always have this things has to be made in time. So Norway said we had to deliver the monthly accounts from the previous months on the 10th of the following month. So we had 10 days to finish reconciling, collecting all the cash boxes from the different places in Afghanistan. We had 8 field officers. They were flown to Kabul maybe on the 2nd in the month, and then we had 10 days or 8 days to finish the accounts and reconcile them. And I was lucky it was not Halima who was responsible for that, but an accountant called Ahmed Say. But Halima was responsible for calculating taxes. And every single month when I asked her, how are you doing? She always needed 3-4 days more. You know, and I didn't like that. And she somehow didn't have this sense of that things have to be finished in time. And I also later found out that she was maybe not able to find out how to do the tax calculations. Anyway, she got angry over something, I don't know what it was, but I remember that she wrote a resignation, and I thought it was great. And I hurried up to sign before she regretted it. But in the hindsight, it's totally wrong what I did, because she didn't have experience with working in an office. And of course, it's an NGO's job to make sure that we train her and capacity build her to make as it's possible for her to do her job in a proper way. And this is really something I regret, that I didn't take care of her and let her stay. Yeah. Then I came back to Afghanistan in 2014-15 with EU, and I was with this police EU mission. And in the personnel department, the majority of the local staff, it was women. And these women, they could read and write and have studied, and they had work experience. They were just fine. And now, after the US left Afghanistan, it's somehow back to square one. I mean, women are not allowed to work anymore in offices. I think they're allowed to work in factories, but not in offices. So I also, it's one of my, talk about one of my favorite things. I think that we are naive in us internationals when we come there. We think that Afghanistan is the same country as we have in Europe or the States, but it's not the case. It's a country where you almost like Denmark in 1800 something, and women and men, they are not together in school. It's girls' school and boys' school, and if you go to a wedding, you have women sitting in one room and you have men sitting in another room. They are never together. Basically, that's why you have arranged marriages, I think, because they never meet. And we just think that we can throw them together. When the women are supposed to work, we put them in the same office, and without making guidelines how to behave when they are together. So there was a lot of problems with men and women that liked each other, especially in Norwegian, the Refugee Council. It was sitting and holding hands, and one cleaner was going into a room with a driver and things like that. So we really had to think about what you do when you come to a country like that. So I became more culturally aware of this experience. Then we have on to one, is that correct? We had, I went one time I did every week I went to this restaurant called Boccaccio in Kabul with my friend from Norwegian Refugee Council. And one evening we were sitting at a table, and my face was turned against the door, the entrance door, and my friend, she had turned her back to the door. Anyway, we were sitting and eating and sharing a bottle of red wine, and then suddenly 10 armored men came into the room. They didn't wear uniforms, so they were not police and they were not soldiers, but they were dressed in black and they were wearing AK-47. It was really, really scary, I tell you. And then they came over to our table and said, "Go out in the hall, get out of here," they said. And we went out in the hall, and all the guests were standing in this hall, and we couldn't get out of the hall because the door was locked. And there was an American woman there, and she was standing and screaming up hammering the door, "Let me out, let me out." She was so scared. My friend and I, we were standing in the other end of the hall, near the kitchen door. And I was trying to hide my friend so she could text our security advisor. Anyway, we were so lucky, because 2 weeks before I had been in this restaurant too, and I had complained about the wine. And it was not the owner who was there that night, but it was the brother of the owner, and I had complained to the brother of the owner. And so he remembered me, and he came to me and asked if we wanted to go with him to his house, to his apartment, to get out of this place. So we got out of the kitchen door together with him, and we drove home to his place, and we were picked up by Norwegian Refugee Council's driver. So we were lucky. But he said it was the religious police, Taliban's religious police. It's like you have in Iran, you have the moral police, I think it's called. But you have someone making sure that you are properly dressed according to the Sharia law. You have someone who said you cannot drink. This kind of police, it's very tough police, and you can get really, really punished if you don't behave according to the Sharia law in a country like Afghanistan. And those were the 10 men, they were from that police. So it was a bit frightening, and because also we had been drinking. But nothing happened to us, but the waitresses were all put in jail, and they were accused of being prostitutes. And I don't know if they ever got out, but we never saw them.
What happened to the rest of the people in the hall that couldn't get out the other door?
I don't think anything happened, but I don't know for sure because I was gone. But I'm sure I would have heard about it if something happened. But later on, they start killing people in the restaurants in Kabul. So it was too dangerous in the end to go to a restaurant.
Right.
Yeah. So that was. And then the last story I want to tell about is my story from Israel, Palestine. In 1948, Israel became an independent Jewish state. And all the Palestinians living in Israel, and Israel is the white area here, not the brown. All the Palestinians, not all of them, 750 Palestinians were chased out of Israel, and many of them came to the brown areas, that is what we call occupied Palestinian territories, East Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza. And some refugees came to neighboring countries like Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, and some came to other countries. In Denmark, Palestinians is the next biggest ethnic group after the Turks. So there's a lot of Palestinians in Denmark. The white area that Israel took, it was 78% of the country, and there was 22% left in these occupied territories. So when you think about Biden saying a two-state solution, it's a country size as Jutland in Denmark, and 1/5 of this country that will go to the Palestinians. And this population, there are 7 million Jews and there are 7 million Palestinians now. So they would get a much smaller country, and also all the refugees are, I think that I've heard a figure called 6 million, but they are promised that they can return to Palestine too. So if they're gonna live in the occupied territories, I have heard someone saying you need to build like Singapore, you build up, they cannot, otherwise there's no room for them. Anyway, I lived in East Jerusalem in a neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah, and it's a very, very famous neighborhood, Palestinian neighborhood. And I lived on the first floor, and I had a balcony, and from this balcony I could follow what was going on the street, and you can see there's a lot of demonstrations down there, and every week there was these demonstrations, and it was Palestinians and Jewish activists who demonstrated because Jewish settlers took over the houses from the Palestinians in this area. If you see the red circle on the right is an Israeli flag on one of the buildings, and it was one evening a settler came with a security company, and he threw out the family who had lived in that house almost 50 years, and he threw out all their furniture, and then he moved in and raised this Israeli flag. my Norwegian Refugee Council, I think this program is one of the best programs they had at all. They worked with the rights, the Palestinians' right to land and property. And they also assisted my neighbors in this area, Sheikh Jarrah. And one day when my son was there, it's my oldest son and his wife, the one to the right, she's from Norwegian Refugee Council, and she's working with the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and she was the one helping them with their rights if they had an eviction order or had a demolition order of the house or something like that. She was responsible to find out whether that was legal, and if there was a case she wanted to bring to court, this Palestinian lawyer, he went to court. You cannot have someone from Norwegian Refugee Council going to court in Israel, but he would go to court. And they were telling us about 28 families living in this neighborhood in a house similar to this house here. This is the front page, the front side, and this is the back side of the house. And these 28 families, they had similar houses, but there was a Jewish organization said that they bought the land where these houses were built in the end of 1800s something, and so the land belonged to the Jewish organization. I don't know which one had right or not right, but anyway, this was an issue. And then she introduced us to Nabil Al-Kurd and his very, very famous family. And he told us about how they got this house from UN's Organization for Palestinian Refugees. It's UNRWA, in 1956. And then they had lived peacefully there until 2009. And in 2009, a Jewish settler, Eckhoff, he moves into a room in the house, and it's not like he come and say, I would like to rent a room. He just moved into the room and with his dog. He had a Rottweiler dog, and he also raised the Israeli flag in front of his window there. You can see the tent. The tent was there to protect the family, that settlers didn't take over the rest of the house. So it was a little bit hectic, and this picture is taken by me in probably 2011 or something like that. Then in 2021, they get a Kurd family and some other families of these 28 families get an eviction order that they are told to move out of the house. And then Eckhoff, the settler, it's him here, he says, then I want the whole house. And then there's a video here, you're going to see the beginning of the video where Eckhoff is arguing with Mona Al-Kurd, she's the daughter of Nabil, about this house. And this video has been seen by more than 1 million people.
Stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one
Can you hear?
is allowed to steal it.
Can you hear?
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? What are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
you are stealing my house.
Anna,
Yeah?
were the Kurds, were they from Kurdistan originally?
No, I don't think so. They were from Haifa.
Oh, okay, I didn't know. the name.
But they were refugees from 1948, and they lived in Haifa. It's now Israel, and they moved to East Jerusalem. Anyway, the Times announced in 2021 that Mona and her twin brother Mohammed were among the 100 most influential people in the world, because they created so much awareness about this eviction order that they temporarily were allowed to stay in their house. And now I had the good news. Last year, Israel's Supreme Court has ruled that, it was in 2022, but they have ruled that a group of Palestinian families slated for eviction from the occupied East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah can remain in their homes for the time being. So anyway, this whole Israel, it taught me how to be extremely political aware of what I was doing when I worked in the occupied Palestinian territories. The last thing we have to hurry a little bit. I want to tell you about my personal development, but when you live in these places, you're extremely isolated. You cannot walk on the streets often, only some countries, but normally you are working and living together with other expats, and you have lots of conflicts. And many of these expats, they have problems at home, that they have drug problems, mental problems, alcohol problems, and when they move to the war zones, they think that all these problems will stay home, but it doesn't. It goes from the frying pan to the fire in these countries, and the whole thing can almost explode out there. And with me, to make it short, I've been a difficult child. When I was younger, I've been the warrior at home. I have a sister, she was a peacekeeper. And my father said in his wedding speech to my husband that he would be married with a difficult wife. And anyway, when I go out there in the war zones, I'm difficult too somehow, and it gets a little bit worse than all used to be. So I got hold of my sister, and she taught me that's a peacekeeper at home in my hometown. And she taught me how to behave, how I managed conflicts, how I communicated, so she taught me, I don't think you can change your personality, but you can change your behavior, and that's what I did. So I was able to stay 15 years out in the war zones. But if I hadn't changed behaviors, I would never have been able to be there that long time. And this is the last picture from the war zones. I stopped in 2018, and I was 71 years old, and I feel I found my purpose to live out in these war zones. It sounds strange, but I really enjoyed being there. So if you ever consider, it might not be to go to war zones or anything like that, but have a dream where you can have your life be better, it will be better, then you might consider taking this step and go for your dream. That's my. And now I want to talk about when I came home, because that was also a bit of a challenge. I had these 6 children, and when I left, there was 2, I think, that were married and they had 1 child each, so I had 2 grandchildren. But then the family somehow explodes while I am away, and I have now today I have 14 grandchildren, and with the husbands and the wives, we are 27 people or something like that. So we are a huge family, and we meet every other Christmas, and we have this family photo taken. And I thought I was the head of the family. I was totally naive. And then I look at this picture we had taken, and I'm just standing in the back on the toes, and nobody noticed me at all. Oh, I'm not the head of the family anymore. But I was so mad about this picture from 2007 it is. So I asked them all to go out again, and we had the picture retaken with me in the middle. but I don't think it means that I'm the head of the family again. It means just that they cannot say I shouldn't be noticed. And yeah, I think I more have a grandmother role now. And the last thing I want to talk about is my children's reaction. What they thought about me leaving, and this comments you get now is from after I came home. My oldest daughter is the one here. She says that if I hadn't done this new beginning and had this life where I learned a lot about culture and security and political things, I would have been a grumpy woman sitting in the couch in my house in Allerød, where I come from in Denmark. So she thinks it was good I did it. And I want you just to hear a little bit of how my children speak Danish. Some of you might know how to speak Danish, but...
Vi om, at vores mor rejste ud, mens vi stadig boede hjemme. Altså, vi var jo lidt unge, men til gengæld, så var vi også i en alder, hvor vi synes, det var fedt at være sammen med Vind.
Yeah. This is how it sounds in Danish. Well, I'll not let them talk too much, but my youngest daughter says in the end of this interview that in the end, they got a much happier mother home after these 15 years, and they were glad I did it. So I somehow hope that you have been inspired by this book talk, and hope you will go ahead with your dreams. And thank you very much for listening.
I would say you not only learned a lot about those things you said, but you also learned a lot about yourself, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, yeah. I learned a lot about myself, yes. And not only good things.
Did you have time away? Were you able to go back to Denmark?
Yeah, every other month you have a rest and restitution. So, because your head is like, so you get home 1 week and then, but you also have normal vacation. But you normally take that at Christmas time and the summertime, but every other week they insist that you go home because you are so aggressive if you don't do it. It's everybody. I think that almost all the NGOs and the UN, they have this rule. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
Did you go back to Denmark that often? Or were...
Yeah, I always went back to Denmark, so I've not seen much of the rest of the world. I almost always went back.
Did you have to pay your own way then?
No, they paid. Yeah. I think they had a place in some country close by where they said they would pay that, but they always ended up paying for all of us to go home.
So how much did you use the modern technology to talk to your children at home? Did you use WhatsApp?
That's a good question. I thought when I left I was going to write emails to them, long emails, so telling about my life, and then they could write to me and tell about their life. But you know, young people nowadays, they I wrote long letters in the beginning and they write a one-liner, you know. So I gave up on that, and then I started also when there was bad things happening, like a bomb going off close by. I wrote, in the beginning I wrote home and said, now I'm okay, something like that. But they didn't read the newspapers, so I stopped telling them, except my youngest son. He was writing to me, Mom, are you, sometimes when I read in the newspaper about the bombs, so he wrote, are you okay, Mom? And that was somehow nice that he contacted me about that, but otherwise, it was mostly when I was at home I had contact with them, not very often, long distance, no.
So when you went home, like on vacation or whatever, how long did it take you to kind of stop thinking about work?
Yeah, that's a good question too, yeah. Because I had it when I came home for only 1 week. I could hardly speak with my children because I was so messed up in the head. And it took me at least 4 or 5 days to get normal, and I don't know if I ever got normal before I had to go home. It took really some time, and I was not ready to face the children when I came home. I just wanted things to be quiet around me, and I would just sit in my house and do nothing. But it's a very good question because it was a challenge. Yeah.
So where's your next adventure taking you?
I don't know yet. I don't know what I did in July last year. I visited the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon with a high-level Palestinian man and his wife, and they took us around, and I was able to talk with political leaders of the camps. You know, it's the one that controls the refugee camps in Lebanon at least, and so it was very very exciting. And it was 1 month before this 7th of October where Hamas attacked, but I actually was able to meet Hamas in one of these camps. So, yeah. They're not all bad. I mean, it's not war. They're not in the army's area, all of them. Some of them are giving charities to the refugees. Yeah.
Would you feel at all safe going to Israel right now?
Safe when?
Safe. Would you feel safe personally going to Israel, anywhere in Israel right now?
No. I wouldn't go there. No. I think when Iran is attacking with drones and rockets and all over Israel, it's terrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't go there.
What about Lebanon?
Lebanon is okay security-wise, but they have no money, so you have electricity half of the time, so you have internet half of the time, and you have light half of the time. So in the night, when I was staying there, you had to use your mobile phone to go to the bathroom and things like that. And it was in July, so it was hot. Yeah, no air conditioning, no nothing. Yeah. I wouldn't go on vacation in Lebanon now because they're so poor right now. It's not functioning, the country. Anything else?